So, are we ready for this now? All right. We're going to look about Esther.
Your head down. There's a time, but it's not now. Sometimes you gotta go uninvited. Sometimes you gotta speak when you don't have the floor. Sometimes you gotta move when everybody else says you should say, no way, no, not today. You gotta ask if you want an answer. Sometimes you gotta stand apart from the crowd. Time to keep your head down. There's a time, but it's not now. Sometimes you gotta go uninvited. Sometimes you gotta speak when you don't have the floor. Sometimes you gotta move when everybody else says you should say, no way, no, not today. You gotta ask if you want an answer. Sometimes you gotta stand apart from the crowd. Long before your heart could run the risk, you were born for this. Yeah, you were born for this. One step, one move, born to trust you, made to lay my life before you. So I gotta go. Sometimes you gotta speak when you don't have the floor. Sometimes you gotta move when everybody else says you should say, no way, no, not today. You gotta ask if you want an answer. Sometimes you gotta stand apart from the crowd. Long before your heart could run the risk, you were born for this. 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 You were born for this.
So as we continue on with this story, that is, I think, what I'm going to do this morning. I want to retell the story of Esther here and see where we can find ourselves in there. Because like Esther, life is crazy. I mean, it seems like our lives, it seems like every week we talk about the craziness of life, the uncertainty of life, what is going on in our world and our country. We can think of our own lives, of how one minute we're up and then the next minute we're down. You know, last week we talked about graduation and how life is like a roller coaster. And at the top of the hill, and then you drop real hard, and you just never know. We're confused, we're hurt, we're happy, we're sad. It just takes a lot out of us. And we always want to ask questions. Why does this happen? Why is this going on? Why all of a sudden did things change? Why did I make this choice? If I would have made a different choice, maybe it would be a different situation. All of these things start running through our head. But even in the chaos of our lives, even when we don't understand, there are moments in life where things seem to come together. Whether that's good or whether that's bad, where things seem to line up and you start to wonder, wow, all of a sudden it feels like somebody is behind the scenes orchestrating something. And now this world has a lot of different explanations for that, but as Christians, we would define that as God, as that there is a God behind the scenes. And even though we don't understand what is going on, and even though we have questions, we have a faith that says we have a God that will act in our lives and bring together some miraculous things. Now this is where we kind of find the story of Esther. And I want to talk about the lower story, about the story that Esther is living in that life. And this is where we find it. Judah is still in exile. And actually at this point, a lot of the exiles were allowed to go back home. So some of them have left Persia. This is where they have been held exile. And Persia is this big land. It has about 127 territories in it. And the Jews are all dispersed all over the place. So some of them went home, and then some of them decided they have been in exile for so long that they have liked where they are. They have kind of become inhabited in the culture and all of that. So they decided to stay behind. They liked what they were doing. They were comfortable. I don't know, maybe they liked the coconuts or whatever that may have been. They decided to stay. So Esther and Mordecai. Now Esther has a cousin and his name is Mordecai. And they decide, they're the ones that say, well, we're going to stay here. And there really wasn't anything going. The Bible kind of says Esther just was beautiful. That's kind of the description we have. But they decided to stay, which wasn't necessarily a light decision, because in Persia, the Jews were killed and persecuted. It wasn't a nice place to be a Jew. It was very hostile for them. And at this time, there was a king, as you saw in the video, King Xerxes. And he had to be the most powerful person in the world at this time. So he was throwing this party. And this is how it all kind of starts to form together. But this one time, King Xerxes was throwing this party. And he wanted his wife, at the time the queen, to come and greet people. But the queen decided, I'm not going to do that. I don't want to greet the people. So she disobeyed the king. Well, of course, the king wasn't too happy about that, and the king's court all said, well, you're going to have to teach her a lesson, because if you don't teach her a lesson, all of these other women are going to think it's okay to disobey their husbands, especially the king. So you're going to have to set something straight. So King Xerxes says, okay, well, we're going to do this. And long story short, he takes his wife and he banishes her. He says, well, if you're not going to listen to me, you're kicked out. Just get away from me. And now he doesn't have a queen. So the king says, okay, he sends out his aides, says, go out and look for the most beautiful women and bring them to my court, because I need a new king. I need a new queen. So they start this look for a new queen. And again, we are living in biblical times where women did not have any rights. So if the king's aide saw a girl, a beautiful woman, and said, hey, you're going to come with me, they had no say in the matter. They were just taken. And then for about the next 12 months, they were kind of trained on how to act in the royal court and what needed to do. And then the king was going to choose a queen out of these contestants. Sort of like their very original Bachelor. Okay? I mean, in a very real sense, it was sort of like that, okay? Maybe not as crazy as the one on television now, but the king was going to choose, and these women had no say. Well, Esther was in the court one day, and one of the aides saw her and thought she was so beautiful, and Esther ended up with these women. And then as you read the story, it says that Esther became the favorite. That so much so that they gave her own apartment, they gave her the best of everything. So she was elevated to almost the top of that list. And then all of a sudden, the king saw her and it was over. The king says, that is who I want to be my queen. So here you have this lower story. The story of these two Jews that decided that they were going to stay behind. They didn't know what was going to happen. They didn't know what God had in store. And then all of a sudden, they had nothing. And then all of a sudden now, she is the queen of Persia. And of course, Mordecai tells her, listen, only have one advice for you. Do not let them know that you are a Jew. That is not going to end well. So she hid that part. And she became the queen. Now, on another side of the lower story, we go back to Mordecai. And on this side, the king had an aide, and the top aide was Haman. And Haman was at the top of the list under the king. And as a result of that, people had to bow to him and kind of worship him in a sense, because he was to be respected and feared. Well, of course, Mordecai, being a Jew and wanting to have allegiance to God, says, I am not bowing down to this guy. So when Haman would walk by or Haman would be around, Mordecai would not bow. Well, of course, Haman was upset about this and his pride was hurt. So Haman says, well, fine. If you are not going to bow down to me because you are a Jew, I'm going to kill you. But then Haman was so upset, he's like, it's not going to be good enough for me to kill one Jew. I'm killing all of the Jews in all of the 127 territories of Persia. So they had to figure out how they were going to do this. And they wanted to do it on a certain day, so they rolled some dice. And they decided that they were going to murder these Jews on the Hebrew day. I think it was, if I remember correctly, Adar 13, which sounds like something from Star Wars or something. But Adar 13 basically is February or March, that time of year. And it was 11 months away. Now, can you imagine being a Jew and that hanging over your head, knowing that in 11 months we're all going to die? So they come up with this, and Haman goes to the king and says to the king, listen, I was disrespected. There's Jews here that aren't listening. We need to take care of them. And he convinces King Xerxes to put out this decree that on that day, all of the Jews are going to be massacred. Now, the important part to remember about that is that during this time, whatever the king said is law, and you cannot change it. Nobody can change their mind. The politicians cannot repeal it. Nothing can change. So it is set in stone. I want you to remember that because we go back to that in this story. But they okay it, and now it's going to happen. Well, Mordecai finds out. And it says that Mordecai was in mourning. And as a result of that, he marched back and forth in front of the palace wearing ashes and sackcloth, just mourning. Well, some of the other women in the king's court saw him and went to Esther and said, Esther, isn't that your cousin out there? And Esther says, well, yes, and I'm going to go. And she goes and talks to Mordecai. And Mordecai says, listen, Esther, this guy, Haman, the king's right-hand man, is going to kill all of our people. We're not safe. You're going to have to go beg from the king. You're going to have to go ask for mercy for your people. Now, Esther's presented with a dilemma because she remembers what happened to the last queen that questioned the king or disobeyed the king. And she thinks it's a little hopeless. And I got to imagine that she starts to question everything again. Things were going so well, and now all of a sudden, look, I'm put in this position. Why did this happen? Once again, well, maybe if we would have left, I would have never been selected to be in the king's court. None of this would have happened. We would have been safe. We wouldn't have to be worried about being killed, and starts to question all of these things. But then Mordecai talks to her. And in the 4th chapter, in verse 14 of the book of Esther, to me, this is one of the great sayings of the Bible. And it echoes into all of our lives. Even if you do not have a theology that says God orchestrates everything and God does everything, there's still some truth in this passage where Mordecai tells her, and this is verse 14, it says, for if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will die. And who knows but that you have come to this royal position for such a time as this. Listen to that. Mordecai's telling her, listen, I don't know why things have happened, but perhaps you were placed here for a reason. Perhaps you were placed here for such a time as this. Think about our own lives. When we think about the chaos in them and things that have happened, and then we remember that we are God's. And maybe God has a plan. And maybe we don't understand that plan. And I do not hold the theology that says God has everything planned out and dictated. But I still have a hope that says somehow God is working things in the background. Why do people suffer with cancer? I have no idea. Why do bad things happen to good people? I have no idea. Why is our world going crazy and people are deciding to blow up everybody? I have no idea. Why did my family fall apart because of all of the abuse? I have no idea. But I have a hope that says somehow God is working. Somehow God has not left us alone. And perhaps some of the way that we have to think is that I was placed in certain places, you are placed in certain places for such a time as this. I always was told by one of the professors at Bethany that said, when you want to look at a situation, and you say, well, where is God in the situation? And perhaps you don't see God. And I think I've said this before. She always said, maybe it's you that has to bring God into the situation. Maybe it's up to you to bring God into this. I mean, that's a humbling idea. But just like Esther was reminded that for such a time as this, we have a job to do. So she wrestled with this. She wrestled with it. So Esther says, okay, Mordecai, go tell all of the Jews, go tell all of our people to fast with me for 3 days. Give me some time to think about this. Fast and pray. So they do this. And then, of course, the king is having this dinner party again. And at the dinner party, Haman is there. So Esther goes up during this dinner party and tells Xerxes, he says, listen, I am a Jew. So she reveals her secret to them. And your right-hand man here, Haman, wants to kill all of us. Well, the Bible says that the king was so upset that the king had to leave the room for a minute. And at that moment, Haman knew he was in trouble. So the Bible says that Haman started to beg Esther for his life. Please have mercy on me, queen. I was upset, blah, blah, blah. And as a result of this, somehow Haman fell into Esther. And he happened to fall into Esther just as the moment as the king came back into the scene. And of course, the king saw Haman touching his queen and thought, well, Haman's about to assault my queen. So again, Xerxes in his temper decided that Haman was going to die. So he kills Haman. And after Haman was dead, he had a position was open. And again, then Mordecai was there. And he says, okay, Mordecai, now you have this position. So all of a sudden, you have these Jews that thought they were going to die. Now they are queen and the right-hand side of the king. Because God is working things out. And I'll go back to the other part of the story where we know that because of what Haman did, and the king already set a decree that says, we can't change this. The Jews are still about to die on this certain date. But now Mordecai was promoted. So Mordecai says, okay, well, I get a chance to ask the king for a favor. And he knows he can't change the order. But he asks the king, he says, King Xerxes, I know I can't change this, but allow us to defend ourselves. Allow us to fight back when this day comes. So the king says, fine, you can do this. Well, 11 months pass, and if you have read this story, you know what came. A bloodbath happened, but it wasn't the Jews that died. These Jews rose up, and it says that they killed 76,000 of the Persians. Now, not a very brethren story, okay, not a very pacifist story, a lot of violence and bloodshed, but the Jews fought up. God protected God's people. God stepped in. And it was because we have this heroine, Esther, that decided that I'm going to have to speak up. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm going to have to take a chance here. And at the end of the 4th chapter is another great verse where Esther responds to Mordecai when Mordecai says, well, perhaps you are placed here for such a time as this. And Esther says, well, maybe, and maybe I have to go, and if I die, I die. She was ready to lay down her life for her people. But why am I sharing this? Why do I think this story matters? Because just like some of the other stories we have seen or read, we have seen how our lower stories meet up with God's upper story. How God pulls things together and orchestrates some things. We think in our lives, well, where is God? What is God doing? My life is upended. I don't understand what is going on, but I know that God has something to do with it. So we rely and we have faith and we have trust. We understand that perhaps part of our Christian journey is for us to stand up and do something for such a time as this. You know, our district with the refugees, trying to figure out how we can be of assistance. The addiction ministry, the backpacks, all of those things we mentioned last week. The disaster relief that people go to. The people that we come into contact with every day that we don't think matters. We have to remember that perhaps we are placed here for such a time as this. Will we be faithful to that? Even if we think, if I die, I die. Your job this morning is to listen to that story and ask yourselves where you find yourself in it. What does it mean to you? I mean, I can go on and give you lessons and say, well, this is what needs to come out of it. But I don't think that is the most beneficial way to hear this story this morning. I think the most beneficial way is just to hear the story and then say, okay, where does this touch my life? Where am I in it? Where is God working in my life? What is it saying to me? This is how we see our lower stories met with God's upper story. When we pay attention to what is going on around us. When we can say, I have no idea. I don't know. But I know God is here. You know, we're going to sing, We Shall Go Out with Joy. Which may not seem very, well, what does that have to do with Esther? But to me, we can sing that because we know that no matter what we are facing, whether it is dark, whether it is good, whether it is hard, whatever it is, we can still say we can go out with joy because we know that we have a God that goes with us. We know that we have a God that is not done writing our stories yet. We have a God that tells us to go for such a time as this. And I am with you. So let us sing this song.